When you see value in all directions, you add value in all directions. Accenture. Let there be change.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Track 1, Environment, Social, and Governance, Better Data Insights, Enabling Companies' ESG Goals and Ultimate Benefits Society. I'm your track producer, Robert Lutton, Vice President, Sandhill Consultants, and I'd like to welcome you to this morning's session, what data and AI high performers are doing differently, what the research might surprise you. So I'd like to start off with a few housekeeping notes. If you're here this morning, it will be a repeat, but obviously this session is being recorded. The presentation will be available in the symposium either tomorrow or a little bit later. And it's free for everyone who registered. And the recordings will then be uploaded to our YouTube channel in the coming months. The YouTube channel is CDOIQ, so check us out if you haven't already done that. Now, in talking with Sanjeev, he mentioned that he's going to do a live Q&A. So for our audience that is virtual, right, you can participate by putting notes or comments in the Q&A section. I will be monitoring for that. So please go ahead and use Vohra for our online registrations. So today, I have the pleasure of introducing our main speaker. So Sanjeev Vohra, who is the global lead for Accenture Applied Intelligence. So Sanjeev is a seasoned data leader, respected innovator with more than 18 years at Accenture, serving in a variety of leadership roles, focusing on large-scale digital transformation to create new growth opportunities. He's also a member of Accenture's Global Management Committee. In his current role, Sanjeev helps clients across industries and market evaluations to maximize and scale businesses through the strategic application of data, analytics, advanced analytics, and artificial intelligence and automation. He's responsible for the company's applied intelligence strategy, business growth, talent development, industry-specific solutions, strategic partners, and V&A investments. Sanjeev, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much. And it's great to be here at MIT. I mean, I've been here many times in the past for multiple reasons. We have a strong association with MIT for the last many years. For the last 17 years, we have been doing a lot of work with MIT and obviously with MIT CDOIQ as well. So great to be here. I just wanted, listening to the last session as well, I got some time to listen to the last session. I think this is the first time I probably are talking around research in such a forum, because normally research gets discussed in a very small setup, right? And because people want to engage and interact about the research findings. So I just wanted to make sure that we can make this more interactive session. So I'll try to do two things. One is the manual raise of hands, so all of us can see. And I think there's a virtual audience as well, so we'll figure it out to get their reaction. But maybe a raise of hand a few times to just see whether we are connected on the topic or not, right? And the second thing is, if I may ask you, I think there are people in the room who can help with the mic. But if you guys want to share a story which all of us can learn from, then I'll pause in between in certain intervals to just ask you a specific comment or specific experience you may have on that topic. And I hope that's fine with you, right? I just wanted to be a more engaging session rather than just a monologue, right? Okay, let me start with the video. amazing video done by a marketing team, and probably this is the most exciting item of the session because, because usually when you do a tech session, you actually have a lot of demonstration, you show something real and powerful. But given it's a research, I think it's going to be numbers, facts, so you'll probably get more information, but I think engagement is super important. So I told him that, how can you help me get us on a common footing so that we can start discussing this topic. So thanks to them. What you saw here, and by the way, just want to let you know, whatever I'm going to talk today, I will talk more about AI, which is artificial intelligence, but just keep in mind that that's the next frontier. You cannot do AI without data, right? You just cannot do AI without data. We all know that. But I'm just going to use this AI and just make sure that you understand it's a synonymous to data and AI as a sibling. So just keep in mind it's both together as we talk about the session today. You saw the last 70 years of evolution in this video, but that's just because it was coined 70 years back, right? But Genesis could be much further down, ahead of, much before that, right? For centuries, people have been talking about, how to do computing, how to ensure that we can get the maximum returns out of that, how to evolution of the computer science, evolution of the computers, and so on and so forth. We're not talking about that, we're talking about the last 70 years, but the last 15 years, I think fundamentally has been very different, right? For a common man to know what is artificial intelligence. And I think the last 15 years with the investment that has happened through a certain scientist who had really invested, especially with the advanced AI on neural networks, deep learning, I think things have changed. And then the high-tech companies or the forward-looking companies have just picked up this subject and started to see how can they take out of the academia and put into the commercialization, which is what we see in the consumer market right now, right? So today, this is everywhere, like AI is everywhere. If you see, when you get up in the morning, you start with the, your alarm, which would be set up by AI probably. You are looking at the weather, which we did today morning, by the way, yesterday when I was coming in. You normally look at AI giving you the indication about what the patterns of weather would be in your area. News, personalized news, right? Then you look at travel. I think none of us now can imagine, and if you go and talk to your teenagers, you will find out that they can't even imagine that they can ever do a map because they never studied how to read a map, right? Because they've always been using Google, or the wayfinding apps, right? Whatever, for movement. And then you have the day going, and then you do shopping, which is totally AI recommended engines. And then you are involved in health monitoring. Like so much of activity is going on health monitoring right now in terms of just not even understanding what exactly is your pattern of health, but also recommending a lot of other things in terms of nutrition and diet as well, right? So a lot of progress around health. And then in the end, when you relax, you are still using AI to recommend you the best movie or best things that you want to see before you say goodnight, right? So it's in everybody's life. It's there now, and the day when you get up and when you end, but all in the consumer space, right? And with that, but there's so much of potential outside of consumer place, and that's what we are seeing as the next wave of evolution for AI. Let me share an example. I think that could be very useful as we set the context. So 2 weeks back, I took a PTO. It was long drawn PTO. I had not taken a PTO for the last 7-8 months, so took off, and I wanted to spend some time with my mom, and obviously, and my older son who lives in Canada. He's deep into AI. Yeah, he did his studies from University of Alberta, which is very famous for reinforcement learning. Most of the games came out of that, right? Checkers and others. Right? So and the Deep Minds is actually in that university. So he was at the home. We were spending time together. We took some time off. We went somewhere outside so that we don't have we're not closer to the electronics and all the distractions, if you may. And one of the days, my mom asked a question, saying, "What is this? What AI can do for me?" And I think the question was very loaded, right? It was not about what is AI. She never wanted to know what is AI. She's what AI can do for me. And I think we felt that this was a very interesting question. Nobody is about, like, she asking that question. Now, she's getting used to some technology. She was totally technology. She never used technology for years. So she's very immature, if I would say, right? She can use barely a cell phone, let's say, for example. She's 75 years old. But this question was very interesting. So we sat down as a family, said, okay, let's spend some time on this topic. And we started explaining her, saying that what it can actually do for you. And she started understanding, okay, this can even, and when we explained her that she's already using it actually, but she doesn't know what she's using. For example, when we taught her how to voice call. So we said, you know what is happening when you're doing a voice call, because the AI is translating your voice into text or into voice-to-voice translation. When you're talking about a different language, it is translating into English. So that's all AI. So she understood. She said, okay, that's very interesting. But she also asked a question to us saying, is it harmful? And then we had to explain, because I think she must have heard from somebody else. So we said, no, AI if it's not used properly, obviously it can be harmful. But largely, the intent is to use AI for goodness, which means making us more effective in our daily lives. And that was a great session, because I think it actually set the stage for me as well, saying, is it really important for business to know what is AI? Or is it important for business to know what AI can do, right? So I was thinking about that, and that led to a lot of conversation internally in our organization saying, let's think about this very clearly. Like what do people want to know about AI? And I think when I was listening to the last session also, came out very clearly that there's a lot of work we do in our daily lives to get the data together. It's not easy, it's super complex work, right? But do people at the field level, do they really care about that, or do they want to know what value you can generate faster? Now, once they understand that you can generate a value, then you can explain what it is, actually. Then they will start having more appreciation about this. So we had that concept, we talked about this at home, and then I think she got very excited. We also talked about a very good case example with her, which we did in UKI for elderly segment. And I think I just want to let you know that when we did this work in UKI for elderly segment, we figured out that 200,000 people at an elderly age, actually talk to a human once in a month on an average basis. That's what's happening. So if you're not having social contact, how would you feel? Like, what will happen to your mental health, right? So what we did was we actually worked with Amazon just a couple of years back and created a whole system called as elderly care system, which actually does a few things, which actually helps not only setting the reminders for the elderly people, which is an easy task, frankly, but actually converse, right? Understand their behavior and pattern. Engage back to the caretaker and to the family. So if they see a disruption in the pattern, they get an alert, right? Something's wrong. Today your mother did not, take pills on time, whatever, right? And they never asked for something else. So, but that's how the technology can actually help. But when we did this for the first pilot, I remember when we did for 60 elderly people, the feedback was enormous. I still remember the day when we were sitting in our studio and talking to them and saying, did it really help? Did our last 4 months of effort help you? And some of them actually cried. Right? So when we told that story to my mom, so she got really excited. She said, "Can I get that for myself?" Because she's right now staying alone, and obviously the same interest got developed in AI. So she's now asking more questions than she ever asked, and we are now trying to struggle to kind of answer her on a daily basis. So now we have a consumer and a learner in our family who's kind of pushing us the boundaries, right? But I do want to talk to you about this trend of AI. I think we do see that artificial intelligence is an alpha science. It's an alpha trend. We have heard about this from many people. It has a potential, much more disruptive potential into what it can actually produce. And we believe it's at a tipping point. So when I say tipping point, it means it's an early stage use in the enterprise world. It could be next 2 decades, frankly, maybe more, in terms of how you can actually generate potential use cases for revenue, for efficiency, for growth, for safety, for anything else, right? And that's what I think is a potential in front of us, and we see it very clearly, and that's the reason for this research. So last year when we were speaking to our clients, there was a shift. There was a shift at the C-suite, and there was a shift in terms of asking certain questions. They asked us questions about whether it's the right time to invest in artificial intelligence. What are our peers doing in this space? Is the machine learning really being used or not being used? What does it take actually to build this capability in the company? How important is the data for this thing? Some of the investments haven't gone well. How can we rectify those investments? So there were a lot of questions around that. So we thought it's a great timing for this research, which is called as AI maturity, which means we can probably help all of us to figure out where do we stand right now in terms of use of AI and our capability to actually deliver to the promise, right? That's how we opened this research. 1,600 executives over the globe have participated in this research. We have used AI to even decipher the survey findings coming out of the research, plus from other external sources, like last 10 years of earning data. Like every company goes and says something in the earning calls. We have mined those information, it's all public information, right? To understand what exactly is the pattern, like how the CEOs are now expressing themselves on the field of AI. We've clearly figured out that a lot of has changed in the last few years. And that is what we're going to be talking about today in this session. Okay. And I just want to make sure that I quickly, before I get into the weeds, I quickly introduce myself. I am a mechanical engineer. I did mechanical engineering. I did my MBA in finance, but I spent most of the time in supply chain. So the first 10 years of my career in supply chain and manufacturing across a few industries, and then last 20 years in consulting. What I've been doing right now in Accenture, I lead the applied intelligence practice, which is nothing else but looking at data, analytics, and AI, bring them together for creating a solution that can generate a value to a client, which could be solving a big problem that clients have, or helping them create some opportunities in their market and their industry, right? So that's what we do in our business. We have a pretty large practice, and we are trying to just understand the role of AI as we go along in the future, and how do we actually expand the scope of this work for our clients so that they can start seeing the results. And that's why, again, going back to the point that we commenced this research recently. And our question that we have been asking is what AI can do. And I just wanted to give you a perspective on a few things on this research. But before I do that, we also did a lot of work on the CDO with the CDOIQ survey, and we tried to bring the patterns together. So the C-suite survey that we did, plus the CDOs, what they are saying, or Chief Data Analytics Officer, what they are saying in terms of their role and their engagement with the C-suite, we brought them together, right? So that we can actually see what exactly are the patterns and what are the critical things that will matter in the future. So what I will do is, before I go deeper into this research, I'll just set the pattern for giving you a perspective on what AI can do. So again, it comes back to the discussion which we were having earlier, but it's important to understand the outcomes rather than the plumbing behind the scene. And we'll go with the plumbing and talk about that also in a while. But I think on the outcome side, what AI can do, so AI, very recently, like over the last few years, we started seeing a lot of patterns around revenue growth, and a discussion in the boardroom about how AI can help revenue growth. In this particular case, for example, this is about a client. Which is a bottler. It's a US-based bottler, and they were struggling for the market share. Their goal was to just increase the market share. And what they did was they actually built a new system, which is called as Intelligent Revenue Management System. And they built it based on the lot of proprietary data, which they had themselves, with the first-party data. They also got data from outside, which is consumer data, which is easily available. But what they did was they were able to generate 3% increase in the market share by using more than 100 machine learning algorithms, right? And I think that's where we see the shift happening. So they also got some savings on the spend, but what they did was they used AI for pricing, change of pricing models. They used AI for creating promotion strategies, and they used AI for the marketing spends, because they want to decrease the spend as they go and optimize that across the different geographies. Again, very clearly, we're seeing the pattern, more and more of these discussions on the table, which is beyond efficiency and safety. So these are the use cases which have been there for a while, but we are seeing a very interesting use cases more and more clearly on how AI can actually help in things which are more difficult on the operations side of the business, right? And in this specific case, it's about chemical industry, the chemical client, and they had a massive issue with the asset deterioration, right? And the leakage of assets. And the idea is to how do they actually monitor that? The manual process is very cumbersome. It's just cumbersome. It's also a very unsafe process to figure it out. But what they were doing is they put sensors in the remote locations, which we can always imagine. There are a lot of use cases around that. They put sensors, and they are now using computer vision as a main technology or feature in AI to just understand what is going on. That's just a visibility of what's going on in terms of in terms of leakage, in terms of deterioration of the asset, which is very expensive, and also to make sure that they understand what are the any other waste elements that they need to track around this space. And what they've been able to do is very phenomenal. With these models, they have been able to generate 80% accuracy on water leaks. It's not easy to generate 80% accuracy because and this is all more dynamic. It's not about doing it once in a while in 3 months, but it's actually quite dynamic. They can come to know exactly what's going on a daily basis, like multiple times in a day. Like these companies now doing 2 times a day, but they can actually increase the frequency, but they don't need to increase the frequency for the business use case. But that's the change and shift we are seeing as to how you can actually use for generating safety. The same thing in one of the other clients that we have seen recently is, and this is a client in China. They are a food delivery client, and they had they serve more than 500 million customers. That's the scale they operate in China, obviously. And they have a very strong AI team of their own and data team for their own, because their business is based on the platform. So they sell through platform, just like Uber Eats, let's say, right? So they have invested hugely into that. They have more than 2,000 engineers running all this thing. But they were only optimizing only for one area, which is time to delivery, as you can appreciate. What is the fastest time to delivery? So all the models were optimized for that. What happened in return was the model became unsafe, right? Because if you're optimizing for one axis, one variable, it can do the routing in a fashion which could be injurious or unsafe for the drivers. And they have 3 stakeholders: the customer, who wants everything faster, the restaurants, which want to supply the food, and then the drivers, who has to take the food from the supplier to the customer, right? So 3 stakeholders. But the stakeholder which was suffering the most was, obviously, even suppliers were shouting high because they had to produce the goods faster than ever before. But the real problem was not. The real problem was the drivers. And I think then when we went back to them, we actually used some of the findings and some of the experience from other industries like chemicals, like mining, like energy clients, because they have more safety standards, much higher safety standards than the delivery teams or high-tech companies, if you may. And we use some of the standards from there to implement and explain them how we can be using for the modeling which they're doing. And they have, just imagine, they did more than 500 models to get to the right model. It was a very complex problem, but that's how you can use it for efficiency in the future. And this one is, again, an example of product design, which I think I just love it. This is the next generation, frankly. When the companies have started looking at using any of these data and AI technologies for efficiency and for generating growth, the next big thing is to do it for product design, which means innovation, completely for innovation, which means you can come with new business models which have not been seen before in your market or in somewhere else. In this specific case, this is a consumer goods company, right? Very famous consumer goods company, and they are using AI formulation models. So what they're doing is they're actually having AI to help in creating formulations for the product or the change of product variety. For example, if they have a dishwashing detergent, and assume in a country they want to see more foam because they believe that having more foam in a dishwasher detergent would generate much more better cleanliness, let's say. So if they have to do this modeling, generally they will change the process of building this detergent, or they will actually change the ingredients or raw material. And what this does is this actually, instead of doing a manual study for this, AI actually recommends based on a lot of data that they have, a lot of data and a lot of experience that they have in the system, to say that, okay, if you do this, then this could be the potential benefit for doing it. And not only recommend one, but I was very surprised when I met the team member there or the product manager there. They said the AI model is recommending multiple options and the routing of multiple options, saying that you can pick up this, you can pick up this, you can pick up this. The 3 options, try it out, experiment, and see which one works for you. And I think that's the way the things have started shaping up. And many other examples in the public domain as well, as you may be knowing, like Stitch Fix, right? The company which actually provides you AI-based clothing, designs, right? We are doing a lot of work for a company in Nordic, which is a very famous fashion company, which all of us probably would know. It's a fast fashion company, right? And what they do is they are using enormous amount of AI right now for coming out with no new design patterns for their new collections, right? And that's based on new patterns, new colors, new schema. And that's what the shift we have seen in this area. Now, the question is, how is this all exploding? And our view is that in the last 2 years, it has really exploded very well. 2 years, when the pandemic hit, we found that many companies went with more investment in cloud. Would you agree with that? I mean, I think based on your company, but many companies actually, like our company itself, like we just said, okay, all in. Like we were already all into cloud, but let's not leave anything now pending, right? And with that investment, we found that next step was to initiate and look at for data migration to cloud and look at for all the transformation work that can be done. Now, I just have to, maybe I can ask a question to all of you. Maybe raise of the hand itself is good enough, right? But do you see change of expectation from your management in terms of the speed to market and asking for more or acceleration of these programs in the last 2 years? So if you have seen that, I think I just want to make sure that, I mean, there were quite a raised hands here, but what I want to tell you is, as a part of the research finding, it came out very clearly, from the research finding, it came out very clearly that there is an increase in pace of change. Right? We're clearly seeing at least 500 days or whatever, right? 16 months of pace of change, where people are saying we want to get this faster than we had earlier. From the time when we started conceptualizing about the transformation to the time we can start realizing the benefits of and value from the transformation. So that shift we already are seeing right now, and this also get manifested in the earnings discussion that I had earlier with you, which I was mentioning that when we were mining the earnings call, what we felt was many CEOs who are now talking AI very confidently, that's been increasing significantly in the last 4 or 5 years, right? More than 6,500 citations last year from the top 2,000 companies, just on AI as a subject. And I think that shift we have seen very clearly. Now, this is again another finding which could be very useful. When we were looking at 3 years back, most of the discussion around AI was around call center applications, right? We had a lot of discussion on call center application, a lot of discussion on process optimization. There was a discussion about RPA, right? What is RPA? Is it AI, not AI? It's process automation. A lot of discussion on that topic. But what we have seen in the last year is that many companies now looking for AI as a growth lever rather than efficiency lever. Very clear findings about AI for growth versus efficiency. And what this chart is a little complex, but what it suggests is that most of the companies are going to be looking at the companies in the medium bracket on the left-hand side, they're moving towards the higher side on the right-hand side, which means they are going to be investing hugely, and they're looking for more than 30% influence of growth coming from AI, right? Now, let me quickly define AI maturity and then get to the real crux of the discussion, which is about what are the 5 observations we are seeing from the companies who are achievers and more successful in AI. Like, they're doing something different, right? And that was my whole point today. Like, let's talk about those 5 things, like, and we'll get to that soon. But in terms of looking at maturity, the way we have defined maturity is a measure of a degree of AI capabilities a company would have, right? So, and we have defined the AI capabilities in these 4 segments. Now, below these 4 segments, there are 80 capabilities, right? 80. There are a lot of capabilities around, what we will do in this area. But these 4, if I have to explain you clearly, the first one is strategy and sponsorship. I think does a company have a data strategy? Is it linked to the business strategy or not, right? Do they have an operating model to be successful, right? Is the CEO himself or herself are engaged in the data work happening in the company? Is the board asking the question, what does data can do and what AI can do for them? So that's a specific set of questions and capabilities there. But we talked about that. That's number 1. Like, this is all business discussion. There's nothing about technology and the people who are actually helping us get there, right? Second one, I think all of us will be very familiar. This has been there for like decades, like building the core, building the machine, like, right? Right, whether it's information management system, whether it's AI system, whether it's in applications, mobile systems, but ultimately, they have to come together, ERPs, but how do they become AI enabled, and the data management and governance, everything else. So that piece is the core, which means the ways of working, data and AI factories, right? Right, reporting factories, like, and the skill sets required to deliver that kind of work, right? The third thing is talent and culture. And when I say talent and culture, I think there are three axes to that. The first thing which we saw was very specific on what shift is required at the top level of the company. Like, what do they need to change to think about this topic? The second is the mid-level management, which is actually using the outcomes coming out of this machine. So what are the changes they require to happen? And the staff as well, like business people, the sales people, the HR people who are hiring people, and everybody else. And the third thing is the people who are experts, who are actually part of the core, who are having deeper specialization to build these systems and machines, right? And then last but not the least is responsible AI, which I think I'll come back to that in a while as to how mature people are in that area. And we'll talk about the findings from research, but that's becoming super critical. This topic, I can tell you like a year back, or maybe a year and a half back, it was just a theoretical topic. Nobody was trying to put into practice to a large extent. But I think now we are started seeing the early signs of practice. Like how do actually we embed responsible AI or the fairness or the transparency of AI into the systems? Like how do we actually do it at scale for a company? Because if a company is having, let's say they have to evaluate 100 systems. They cannot do easily, I mean, just think about the time required for assessing those 100 systems, whether the data is trustworthy, and if AI is providing the results which you would like it to be produced, and it's unbiased. It requires a lot of capability, and which I don't think many of us have estimated work, but it's going to be a lot of work in this space just to estimate how this can be done, right? So, because discussion so far has been on the policy matters and regulation. It has not gone to the practice saying that who in the company is actually accountable for that. In many companies, it's always a legal counsel, right? And sometimes a compliance lead, the chief compliance officer, they're involved in that discussion. But from the, and data scientists, obviously, because they know the stuff, right, frankly. But the question is that, and the CDOs, right, because they can understand the concept, they can understand the topic itself. But ownership of putting this into practice at scale is a very different ballgame. So 4 topics here, and what we want to do is just give you a flavor of the final report, right? So this is the master slide. This is like final outcome of the research. Like this is the $1 million slide, let's say, for the research which we did, which is basically about where do people actually fall. Now, I don't know whether you are surprised or not, but we were thinking about the same range largely because in the last 3 years, a lot has changed. Like I was even questioning that, is it really 12%? Like, is it less than 12%? But that came out very clearly that, and these are all data points. These are all data points from the various clients which have given us inputs about how they're performing on various segments. It shows 12% of the companies are achievers, which means they have a foundational capabilities like data and AI core of data and AI. They have a team, they have a factory, they have a process, they have a roadmap to do something like that at scale. And they are generating use cases for business, right, in parallel. Now, what we also figured out when you look at the comments below the scene in research, we found out that all of them are not fully done. Obviously, they can't get fully done because we just spoke about it. It's maybe a 2 decades of journey for any enterprise, but they have started a journey in the right way, or they've gotten there. Now, they can get there from anywhere. They can be builders and get there. Like, for example, if you ask about Accenture, I think we were initially a builder 5 years back, right? We had a very strong central team, right, which was doing a lot of work for us. But over the last 3 years, we have moved to more into the achiever side. Going there, we are not fully there, but we're getting there to the achiever side, which means we have now at least 3 segments where we are very much ready to do things in a business use cases, which can be done in 3 to 4 months versus it could have taken 18 months earlier, right? From the point of conceptualization to the realization of a business use case. For example, in our case, it's HR because we are a people-centric company. We are a 700,000 plus company. We cannot operate without, like HR is our core business function. Because we recruit so many people, we actually train so many people. So for us to know, are we using AI for recruitment? Are we using AI for helping us be more efficient in that process? Are we taking AI for moving people from skill number A to skill number B, like mapping the skill for next generation for themselves, so that if somebody is a Java developer or let's say Agile developer, what is the next thing they want to do in their life, right? So it becomes very critical for us to do that. And we have done it for sales function, for sales forecasting, we've done for HR, we've done for some pieces of operations and profitability. So that's what we are doing in our business. But But that's where we see a lot of people moving on. And I hope it's clear for you. The foundational capabilities are the core capabilities, which is the x-axis, which is about the core data management, data governance, acquisition of data, sourcing, putting it together, curating, putting the AI, like all the modeling piece, model management, all that come there from end-to-end lifecycle perspective. So capture data, curate data, and consume data. Let's say, make it simple, 3 C's of data. And on the right and the left, the y-axis is all about generating the value. Like the discussion we had just had about talent and culture. You cannot generate value if business is not ready to consume what you're going to give them. It's just not possible. The second thing is the sponsorship. Like you need a top-down view and a push to the business saying, this is part of your KPI, like it's going to happen to you, and we are going to learn together, like this whole thing, how to do this effectively. So that's and again, I will not drain on this, but there are multiple capabilities behind the scene, but this could be very interesting for you. So just remember that 12% people are in the achievers bracket, right? And what we found out was that these 12% are able to generate 50% additional revenue growth in use cases versus their peers. And that's super interesting. And I don't know if you have seen this dialogue or not, but I've seen this dialogue happening now very clearly. The discussion of AI for profitability and for growth, revenue and growth, revenue and profitability. As soon as that triggers up in a conversation with the C-suite, it's a different ballgame completely. It just elevates the posture of a discussion completely. So we have seen this, right? And we'll come to a use case very soon, so I'll tell you an example. And the other data point which could be very useful for you is that we also, when we ask people, saying, where do you want to go from now in the next 2-3 years? So we found that 12% of the, and obviously with the whole pattern and discussion pattern, drawing the pattern out of that discussion, we found that from 12%, this group of people will move to 27%, which is, they will be double of what they are today, which shows that it's a very serious discussion now in the organization of thinking through this, right? Again, if anybody has a point of view, maybe we can pause for a minute or so if anybody wants to reflect back or share their journey, please. Can we get the mic, Robert?
Very quick comment. These statistics are, of course, heavily biased towards those companies that can actually achieve a benefit from AI, right? So it's no wonder that those numbers are high. Maybe the others, there's just no potential, right?
Yes, that's why you see 63% people, sorry, I didn't get your name, but Felix, 63% people are in the experimenter zone in the previous slide, which actually means that two-thirds of the companies still have to make major investments in either space. Either they go towards a function. For example, a life sciences company can go into R&D and say, we're going to invest in R&D, boom, like we're going to put more money into technology there. Or they have to start building the core itself, right? They have to start figuring out the way to build the core so that they can exploit the core for multiple use cases. But they have to start somewhere, right, as a process, right? But you're right, absolutely. And then we look at industry split as well. Now, this could be very debatable slide, frankly, because I have some observation on that as well. But again, don't look at observation, because when you look at this slide, somebody will say, oh, my industry is not so low, I should be in the top. But the point here is very clear. One thing is very clear, which I liked about this slide was, or this view and perspective was that everybody wants to move on the right, which I think is not something which we're not expecting. But I think there's a huge gap between, if you see, it's a huge gap, except the companies which are in the high tech, which you can imagine, because they've already been investing for the last 10 years. But other companies, all of them, automotive, aerospace, and defense, huge investments are happening on AI right now. Life sciences, right? Healthcare. So and there's a lot of potential in those industries. And the way this was constructed was not about their efforts and their energy in that area, but the real dollar investment they're making out of the tech budgets, right? So that's what it reflects there, which means there's a huge potential for them to increase their tech budgets to the next level, right? Now let's talk about the uncovering of the art of maturity. So what are the 5 things which are critical? And I'll go through this quickly. The first one is, first lever we are seeing very clearly is that, and we talked about this, that AI has to have a champion. And the companies which have a CEO as a champion are seeing much faster progression of using this thing and data and AI. And I think that shift we have seen. So I can tell you from our experience personally that the amount of conversation that we are having with the C-suite in the last 2 years, we haven't never seen before that. Like we've never seen for the last 10 years. And the reason was because this topic was seen as more of an experimentation, R&D sort of a topic by saying, oh, we're going to invest and see what comes out of it. Most of the investments were going into the things like digital technologies, if you may. And before that, it was ERP. So ERP, then digital technology, and now that's a time when people are looking at data and AI as a subject matter, and when they're elevating the pitch on just understanding. So the companies which have gotten their board members to even have an immersion session on this subject are getting more serious about figuring it out. What does it actually mean? Like, what do we do with that? So we have seen this very clearly. Now, this is an example of a company called Lend-Lease. I don't know if you know that, a construction company. Not a very advanced company, like industry, like in terms of AI. But what they're doing is they're building smart buildings. And they can't build smart buildings without AI. It can't be possible, right? So think about this. They're putting sensors in the building. They're putting a lot of things, and trying to see if they can increase the employee experience. But beyond that, can they give much better insight about the utilization of the space in the building, right, to the property managers? Now, if they do that, and a lot of companies are coming, a lot of companies can do a lot of things with this, right? A retailer can actually figure out what's going on in their entire, footfall of the customer. But for an employer, it could be a big deal, because if you start looking at the return to office now, RTO, right? You can find out how do you want to optimize your space, where do you want to optimize space, how much space do you need in the future, right? This also can lead to a reduction of carbon emission, right? It can lead to reduction of power usage. So all those parameters are being put there. Now they're thinking about how do we make it more, provide even employee experience to the front end, right? For example, can they integrate this data to the teams that they're using or collaboration tools they're using? So they can tell the people who are coming to the office saying, what if you want to do X, Y, Z, because we saw you hanging around with the friends here, right? So they can actually help you generate some more social discussion groups, some new things which can actually help the morale and inspire their people as well. So that's what their remit is. The second, and I think and what I should have asked you this, but I think what we also figured out from the recent research, which is yet not published in the CDO, that many of the chief data and analytics officer, and by the way, we don't have a time to discuss more in detail about this, but there has been a lot of discussion about the role of chief data and analytics officer. In many companies, it's getting elevated as well as we speak right now. But they are now talking, and they've been called for having a discussion on this topic, so which essentially shows that it's getting connected somewhere, right? So if you're seeing a C-level discussion, and if the CDOs feel the same way, it means the demand supply is matching somewhere, right? So very positive sign in terms of what could this result into for people who are playing this role and how they want to expand in the future. The second discussion point was about, which we discussed about investment in talent. I've spoken about this a little bit, but I want to share an example of this company. It's an energy major in Asia Pac region, and a few years back they were having a major issue, as you can imagine, in this sector, on issues about profitability and growth of their hydrocarbon business, because they felt that they need to go to alternative sources of revenues, right? Too much and very much under pressure. And this company has been sponsoring Formula One for many, many years, the Formula One race. So they had their Formula One, they had their Formula One mojo, or their ambition for Formula One, and they started applying that ambition and what they were doing there in terms of winning the races to what they want to do here to their business. They were processing petabytes of data for winning the race. And they say, if we can do there, why can't we do here? Like, we should win our race also, business race as well. And that's what they did here. They came with a very big program around efficiency and around generating alternate source of revenue for themselves in multiple ways, like selling beyond fuel, right? Assume that from a downstream perspective. So if you go to their bunks, they will sell more things which is not fuel and try to get into that business, as you can appreciate. And on the efficiency side, they will try to reduce costs as much so they can increase the profitability at the same time. For example, if they are transporting fuel from X to Y location, they can use a different sort of modal transport. They can find some other efficiency through sea or something else, through different ways to increase their efficiency in that space. So what they did, while they did all these things, can you imagine they had 40,000 people? But you can imagine this industry, this is not a knowledge industry. This is a real industry with a lot of stuff, right? And they had to go through a change management for everybody as they started deploying the digital applications and digital transformation to this company, right? And what they did was a very nice thing, and I love this case study because what they did was they came with the concept called switch. The concept of switch. They said if we have to switch to the new. We have to switch to the new way of learning. So from executive onwards, from the chairman onwards, to the next level, to the next level, to the workers and staff, they introduced a program for learning in parallel to building the core and moving the data, not in sequential. And that will come up in another discussion as well, but we are seeing that more and more nowadays, that can you play a dual velocity card? It helps, it's complex, it's not easy to do it in reality, but it will give you a lot of returns as you do it. And they did this thing. They have, in nutshell, they had 40,000 people. They got everybody trained on digital, on application of new systems, new applications. And the way they did was they felt that nobody has time. Like nobody has the time to learn things. What they did was one thing which I really remember, which was very cool, but they said everybody in the company has to spend 7 minutes a day to learn. That's all. 7 minutes. And that principle they used to generate the entire curriculum, the entire mechanism, and it was done quite well, and then it was tracked very well, department by department to department, where every department head was accountable personally as a KPI to just transform their people into the new world, right? Super critical. Now, we are seeing this in many places. A lot of people talk about, and again, I just want to ask you, and I'm pretty sure, if I ask you, do you have a structured training program in your company for data analytics? I think everybody will say, most of the people will say. I see 50% hands, but maybe less than 50%. But I can tell you that there are two aspects to that, and this is what came out of the study. But I think there are two aspects to that. I think this area is underinvested. If you go and peel the onion, there is definitely investment happening in training the experts, a few experts, and getting more from them, but the business is not ready. And that investment of business getting ready is yet to be done. So I think in many companies we feel is that program, the one I just mentioned to you, doesn't exist in a structured and systematic way. And that can become a problem completely if you don't do it on time, right? Because you will be ready with the solutions, but the business is not ready to consume the solution. The next one is about, I think we are very familiar with all this. I don't want to spend more time, but what I can tell you, one thing is coming very clearly in this area of AI, which a lot of people are now asking, because many companies have started building the data machine and data factory, but they are still asking question about what do we do with machine learning? How do we bring data and AI together? Like how do we do it? Do we do it separately? Is it a part of the same organization? How do we make it run for us? And one thing which is coming out very clearly is that when you look at AI system and application, there are two areas where the investment is going to happen which are weaker in the section. And I'll leave it at that point of time. We can debate, we can discuss in a Q&A. But one is that, how do you actually generate use cases? What's a mechanism of generating use cases? And I think companies are, when they say use cases, when you look at the quality of use cases, it's not done as well it should be for the AI and data practitioner to actually generate value, like to just write requirements for the next level. So that we felt was that the training of the business along with the technical people have to be done together to actually ensure that they understand how to create a use case. It's a more innovative process by design. It cannot be done it has to be done differently. So that's number one, which means bring innovation in the use case identification. Bring the innovation culture in the use case identification. And the second piece we felt was the training of the systems. I think not enough thought has been given how to train the systems, which is normal because people feel training is testing, but I think it's not testing. So just make sure that a lot of people have started to use the IT as software development lifecycle for AI systems, and it doesn't work properly. So you need to understand like how do you train systems and what skills are required for training and how do you actually build at scale, right? What are the mechanics of building at scale? How many data scientists do you need to work on this? is the same data scientist, or do you want to divide two different teams? Those are the questions which are being asked right now in the core. I talked to you about this responsible AI. I just want to make sure that I can give you a flavor of what's happening here. 6% of the companies are actually really putting this into practice as per survey, which means there's a huge gap, right? But the good news is the companies which you saw in the 12% category of achievers, 53% of them, they believe that they need to get into this space very quickly, right? So there's a positive sign as well. But I think this is the last mile in the entire structure of overall capabilities that are required to be there for AI generation. Now, if you look at this thing, it opens up a lot of questions as to how do you build this. It requires a framework. I think it requires 4 things in my view. The first thing is understanding of what's happening in the regulation world and creating a policy which is linked to that, which is your own personal policy of your company, your own personal policy of responsible AI for your organization, which is based on inputs from outside, but also inputs from your own values of your company, right? The second thing is putting an operating principle, operating framework, which means how do you get this into doing it into the company, which includes things like how do you do assessment of AI systems, how do you do it by design, how do you actually, if you find problems, how do you remediate the problems? Do you have a strategy around it? Do you have an operational framework around that? The third thing is the data science team, they have to be totally educated on this because it's critical for them to just understand the issues and challenges with this technology and how they can help actually contain that. And the last but not the least is about generating an interdisciplinary team and training a lot of people and on this topic, because if the whole firm gets trained on this topic, I think you will see people asking this question itself at the time of requirement, saying that, am I doing right things? Is it the right thing to do? For example, in some companies, they don't want to do surveillance, right? They don't want to do surveillance because of the personal data, right? So they are very clear about that they don't want to, in some companies they want to do it, but they don't want to use it, right? So there has to be some specific policy where do you want to use that data, where you don't want to use that data, right? And last but not the least is about AI as a journey. What we felt very clearly, and this came out in a discussion, and you will have, so we have a client called Francesco Tinto. He's a global CIO for Walgreens Boots Alliance. He'll be there tomorrow. We'll have a chat with him. He's been in the role for 3 years. We'll talk to him, but it's very clear. I mean, that's why we wrote a quote from him, because we are seeing this in every client, that this is going to be a journey. So if you ask any client right now, and the C-suite is asking this question, that how much does it take to get there? The question is that you don't have a destination, right? The question is that you have to paint a destination where you want to get there. So every company can probably figure out a way to ascertain next couple of years, but finding a way to build a business case for next 5 years is going to be very tough, because it's very evolving space in terms of 2 things. One is technology itself, because you will figure it out, technology itself is evolving so fast that you can do more in a couple of years than what you were doing last year, right? So the investment profile may change. And the second thing is expectation from the consumer and expectation from your stakeholders will change as well, right? Both will change. So we felt it very clearly that this may be a very important element, that it's a journey. So look at short term, look at long term at the same time. So I just want to, in interest of time, and we can open a question, but there are 5 things we talked about, and I think this is critical for us to know. There's 5 things which came out of research. The first thing is CEO and top level sponsorship. The second thing was invest in talent up early in the game, because if you don't do that, it will become a hindrance later on. The third one comes naturally to many of us, actually. So this is not a concern, but I think the concern which I mentioned was that have you invested in figuring out what are the weak links in your value chain in terms of building these capabilities, and where do you want to invest further, and how do you want to bring that talent? And the fourth one is still low on the radar. It has to be uplifted in every company about responsible AI. It requires a more dedicated effort and energy into this area, plus understanding of the concept itself. And the last but not the least is very simple, which is about how do you actually generate a long and short-term plan so that you keep the C-suite very honest and not overcommit for something which is not feasible in this space, right? So With this, I think I will just like to say one thing. I know that it's on for 5 minutes left, but I just want to make sure that I was in a meeting 3 weeks back in Dubai for a major retailer. And we talked to them, and we have been working for them for the last 8-9 months. They have done a phenomenal job. First of all, they have the data which nobody else has. So they want to open up something called a data company, a separate data company with a CEO, right? Which will serve them as a company, which will serve other people, other companies outside their company, which is, again, going back to the value creation and new business model because of AI. So they have appointed a CEO, they wanted a CTO, they've appointed everything else. They have built a very good machine. We are helping them create more from what they have done already. Strong architecture they're putting in place. They're putting data marketplace for their own people and for external people as well, so that they can have APIs where data can flow to the new applications outside in the business, which is consumer apps, and they can sell and make money out of that. Because they have a lot of consumer data. That's the reason, right? Now they're doing that, and the CEO of this new company reports to the group CFO, and we were in the meeting room, and we were discussing about what does it take to get to the end result. And he has painted a picture of what he wants in terms of dollars and financial returns. And what we said, I just want to let you know what we said in the closing. So one of our colleagues on our team, he pushed him a lot. He pushed him back, saying, "You cannot look for perfection in this world. There's nothing called perfection," because the CEO of this unit is a very strong perfectionist, right? He wants to do everything rightfully. And we were pushing them back that if you do that perfection way, you may not get the results very fast, and you not know what you want to stop doing. So it's better to fail fast if something is not going to work in the marketplace. So our recommendation was that, please start practicing. So first of all was that, please, progress is better than perfection. And to get a progress, let's start practicing something new. So we encourage them to go faster to the go-to-market, and that's a discussion we had in the discussion we concluded with that remark. And I think that really helped us to help them to actually move forward in that journey. Otherwise, they would have spent another 6 months creating a very strong capability internally, but not hitting the clients and the customer they want to go after, right? So I think it came out very clearly. So that's why we started writing down that practice makes progress. So unless you start doing things, you will not know what not to do, which means there are things which may not actually work. Finally, the use cases may not actually work because you designed them theoretically and with innovative mindset, but maybe the customer is still not ready. Maybe want to be ready in the next 2 years. So you want to slow down some of the use cases. And that discussion can only happen when the people in this area actually start working more closely with the forward-looking business and the people who are going to consume this data, right? So with that, I think I will just conclude by only one remark and then open and give it to Robert.
Sure, go ahead.
Which is basically that we believe that if cloud is an enabler, because we do believe that cloud has changed the game in the last 2 years, being very, very frank, because we've seen that discussion which was not there 4 years back. And if data is a driver, then we clearly see AI can be a differentiator, which means AI can give the unfair advantage to the companies which are actually looking for generating much higher value from this. Thank you very much. Robert, we can open for any
Thank you,
Q&A.
Sanjeev. Yeah. So we do have just a minute or two for some questions in the audience. I've got a question I'd like to ask from the Vohra platform, but do we have a question from the audience first of all? Any kind of questions? Okay, so there was quite a few questions came up while you were talking there. I won't have time to go through all of them, but maybe we can get you some additional questions afterwards. But this question came up. It was about the foundation and differential 2x2 framework and research results. Are we missing the AI traction leaders to gain insights as to the success taking the R&D outside the lab into the market as a wildcat ventures traverse introduction gap framework?
Yeah, I think there is in some companies we have seen that very clearly, and that's why I came with a concept called as dual velocity. The concept of dual velocity we will talk tomorrow. Actually, I'll bring it up with Francesco in the Walgreen discussion. But the discussion was basically that if you are investing in AI, you need to show the art of possibility to the business very quickly, which means you need to have a glue between the business and AI, or the person who's running the AI. In some companies, it's the CTO. In some companies, it is the chief data analytics officer. But whosoever is responsible for that, they need some mechanism, some cadence to go and talk to the business in some form, show the power of AI, but also have a discussion about what it can do. I think in getting initial buy-in, and especially on the funding and budgets, actually, if you may see, I don't know how, every company has a different budgetary system, right? But in many companies, the budget are given centrally for data, creating the core, but the budgets for generating use cases are with the business, because if you do that, you get the skin in the game, and you get them to buy in and participate more often. So
Thank you, Sanjeev. So we are actually out of time. I don't know if you're going to be here a little bit longer after the session, so talk to anyone, look if you've got any questions. For our virtual audience as well as our audience here, we have a break for lunch for an hour. So we're back in this session at 12:30. So Sanjeev, thank you very much indeed.